Hey everybody, so I told everyone that we'd be getting at 8 o'clock tonight. Just to get a couple of things out of the way really quick. I am still suffering from the remnants of that illness from 3 weeks ago, going on 4 weeks now. So if I cough or my voice sounds bad, I apologize. So tonight's video is on Harvey Milk and his era. If you don't know who Harvey Milk is, well, that's sad. He's about as important a figure as Martin Luther King or Gandhi. Full disclosure, this video is inspired A, from things in my personal life, but also B, a class that I'm taking. So I hope to see my professor here, then I won't have to send her a recording. Anyway, so I wanted to do a video that would be on Facebook Live, so that would be interactive, because Harvey Milk isn't a person that most people are familiar with. So as I'm talking, I would love to see questions or comments or just observations from your own personal life, or if you do know who Harvey is and you know more than I'm putting into the video, it'd be great to see your comments down below. So I'm going to be trying to do this semi-professionally. I have links that I'll be putting in the comments section for you to look at as I am talking. And I was also testing this video out, how to make it, a few days ago, and I realized that the YouTube videos that I want to show you that are pertinent to our conversation tonight can't actually be played over the same computer I'm talking to you on, so I'm going to be trying to use this newfangled piece of technology. I think I have it figured out. We'll see how successful that is. So, without any further ado, Harvey Milk was the first openly gay politician who ever won public office in the United States of America. Now, that alone should get him on the map just a little bit, but it's the things that he did in his short time in office, and also how that term ended, that should honestly put him in everyone's public knowledge. The fact that we don't teach who Harvey was in schools, even colleges, is, in my opinion, nothing short of disgusting. And it certainly is valid criteria to fit one of my The Truth Hurts segments here on Facebook. So in order to understand what Harvey did, you kind of need to understand what was going on in the time frame that he came about. Now, he first started running for office around 1975. So it's important to understand what was going on with homosexuals in a public sphere just before that. And one of the most famous incidents that happened that kind of started an actual homosexual movement that didn't exist before, because in the 1960s and 1970s, there was much more of a stigma about homosexuality than there is today, if you can believe it. You could be arrested for it, killed for it. It was a really bad time. You could lose your job, you could lose everything. And on June 28th, 1969, at the Stonewall Inn in New York City, there was a set of riots that would begin the push for homosexual rights in a massive way that hadn't ever really existed before. The hotel, or the inn, had been owned by the mafia. So when the police raided the bar that was in the inn, even though it's owned by the mafia, the police did not raid it to look for the mafia. The police raided the Stonewall Inn to get the homosexual men who were there. What they did was they took all the patrons out and they lined them up, and anyone who was dressed as a woman was taken back inside, strip searched by a female, and if the person dressed as a woman was in fact a man, they were then put into the police van to be taken to prison. Now, this happened routinely. This was not an isolated incident. It happened all over the country. And this is New York we're talking about. New York City, you know, the city of all liberals. That's what was happening in 1969. And for some reason, on June 28th, something changed. The victims, were tired of being treated like crap. They're going to demand their civil rights, and they're going to demand them with a lot of protest and a little bit of violence. And thus began what is now called the Stonewall Riots. Now, in 1969, remember, there was the civil rights movement that had just kind of started to end, and there was a famous song from that era, popularized by Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. And the homosexuals, as they were being loaded into the police vans, started singing the song as well. Forgive me, this phone, the internet goes a little slow sometimes, so we're kind of at its mercy. While that is loading, I have a History.com article on the Stonewall Riots that you can take a look at. Post it here. Come on, little phone, you can do it. Sorry, just a minute. Would happen now, wouldn't it? All the tech issues. Chaos theory, right? So the video that I have to play for you spoiled the surprise a little bit. Well, just a minute. Let me try to solve the tech issues. I'll just go ahead and post the link. Was trying to do it so I wouldn't spoil the surprise. Oh, look, it started. All right. I'll still post the link. And it died again. So the protesters started singing "We Shall Overcome." And I have a nice little video for you of the Gay Men's Choir singing it in Moscow. So I'll let it play a little bit. I guess you can't really see it on the screen, can you? So imagine having just been strip searched, you, possibly even your partner, are being handcuffed for no other reason than you have to go to the bar tonight and happen to be homosexual. And someone starts singing this song. And "We Shall Overcome" has been a big civil rights movement song for quite some time. And if you listen to the words, there's no doubt why that was. So the Stonewall Riots begin not as riots, but as peaceful demonstration. They're singing "We Shall Overcome," homosexuals hand in hand. And what happens is it becomes a crowd rallying around this song. And not just gay men now lesbians are coming out. Homeless people started joining in. And soon just supporters who are walking down the street who are done seeing the police raids against homosexuals. And a huge crowd formed outside of the Stonewall Inn. And the police started arresting all of them. And then the violence started. Because for the first time, homosexuals weren't going to take it anymore. And they started attacking the police who were attacking them. Several police officers were wounded. Police cars were set on fire. And the riots got huge. No one burned down any of the shops or anything, though. This was a set of riots that specifically targeted police officers, and not just any random police officers like today. No, the police officers being targeted were those who were actively targeting the homosexuals. So one of the funnier moments, if you will, of the Stonewall riots, part of the peaceful side of the protest, was the gay men locked arms, and right in front of the police riot line, they started kick dancing while singing this song. And I'll again post the link to the song I'm about to play down below in the comments section. And again, using technology, it's not always going to play well with me, apparently. I am sorry about the tech delays, guys, but it's worth it. Well, if you see the link down below, you can always click on it too and go ahead and watch it. The homosexual men formed a line right in front of the riot police officers who were arresting them, and they started kick dancing to Ta Ra 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 Boom Die. And again, one of the funnier moments of the peaceful demonstration of the Stonewall riots. Unfortunately, this phone is not going to play ball tonight. I'm just going to go ahead and try to start the next video because that one I do really want you all to hear. So, the Stonewall riots lasted for a couple of days. There was a lot of vandalism, but again, it was one of the first times that homosexuals had actually stood up for themselves. To Ta Ra Ra Boom Die, one of the lyrics that they changed in mocking the police officers, they changed it to, "We are the Stonewall girls, we wear our hair in curls, we don't want our underwear, we show our pubic hair." So it was to mock the police officers, but again, one of the funnier moments. So this is what the era, 1969, Harvey Milk is going to enter into public office in. When he begins to run, it's a few years later in 1975 in San Francisco in the capital. At the time, he had served in the Navy, a distinguished career. After that, he became an insurance agent. And he gave that up to work with his boyfriend, Scott, at a store called Castro Camera that he and Scott created on Castro Street, which is now like a homosexual mecca in San Francisco. And when they first moved in, they were told to quit because the San Francisco police enforced both man's law and God's law. So San Francisco, not so friendly back in the day, not so liberal. But Harvey changes all that. Harvey, too, had had enough of the prejudice. And so he started working with anyone he could, and became, quote unquote, the mayor of Castro Street. It was an unofficial title, but what it boiled down to was, if you're going to start a business or anything in the Castro, you came to Harvey Milk and he would help you out. And that obviously meant that if you were homosexual, you went to him for protection as well. One of the things that Harvey started, it was popular at the time for both police officers in San Francisco and also lay people to openly attack homosexuals if they were seen holding hands or if they were exiting a gay bar on their way home. So one of the things that Harvey did to try to protect homosexuals was, in his store, he started passing out whistles to wear around the neck. And the deal, the social compact, if you will, that he made with his customers and any homosexual and their supporters that he could talk to in San Francisco and the Castro, was if you heard the whistle, you ran to it to protect whoever was blowing that whistle. And it's impossible to say how many homosexual lives that system saved. It didn't save everybody, but it saved many. And that was Harvey who did that. Now, his first 2 or 3 runs at public office, he ran and he lost. Being openly gay, it was kind of expected that you were going to lose. And then the district lines changed. And the district lines, the new ones, made it to where Harvey's district, and he didn't have anything to do with this. This was just gerrymandering at its finest. And what the new district lines did was they made the Castro Street and the surrounding area its own area, which meant Harvey could now win an election, and he did in 1978. So he became the city supervisor, one of a council of city supervisors of San Francisco, and he became embroiled in a major national movement. You see, with Stonewall and the small homosexual movement that started as a result of it, there was a backlash, a conservative backlash. And one of its figureheads, in fact, the figurehead at the time, besides Ronald Reagan, was Anita Bryant. Anita Bryant was a orange juice saleswoman who was on many a commercial. She was also a popular singer at the time. And she had decided it was her religious obligation to go on a crusade against homosexuals across the nation. And she began her anti-homosexual crusade in Dade County, Florida. Now, Dade County had put out legislation that said it was illegal to discriminate based on housing on the basis of one's sexuality. And Anita didn't like that, so she led a huge movement that forced it to be overturned. So all of a sudden, homosexuals in Dade County could be discriminated against in housing and renting. But it didn't stop there. She decided she was going to go from one end of the country to the other. And all throughout Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, all over the place, one after another, Anita won her victories, pushing her ultra right-wing conservative message. And homosexuals were losing the rights all over the place, and it got worse than at Dade County. She started pushing legislation that if you were a teacher and a homosexual, that you shouldn't be allowed to teach, and pushed the legislation that fired them. But it got worse than that. If you were a supporter of homosexuals in any way, shape, or form, and you taught children, you should also be fired. And that legislation was passed. And it got really, really bad. And then it finally came to California right around the same time that Harvey Milk got elected. Obviously, there was going to be opposition, especially in Harvey's Castro Street in San Francisco. So Bryant in California had teamed up with a politician named John Briggs. He was a state legislator. Now, Briggs had come up with a proposition called California Proposition 6, popularly known as the Briggs Initiative. The Briggs Initiative, championed by Anita Bryant, would have banned homosexuals and their supporters from California public schools. Just, more of the same when it came to her and her ilk. So Harvey decided that this was going to be the thing that he was going to put a stake down on. Enough was enough. And if he had anything to say about it, California would not fall. So Harvey, going above and beyond the role of city supervisor, created a speech, and he gave this speech and variants of it at several different points in time from this moment till the end of his career, which we'll get to. It was called the Give 'em Hope speech. And I have for you a recording of Harvey Milk actually giving the speech. I'll post a link down below, but I'm also going to play the video for you in full.
Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there's a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates will taunt the child, and the Anita Bryants and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV, and that child has several options: staying in a closet, suicide. Then one day that child might open up a paper and it says homosexual elected in San Francisco, and there are two new options. The option is to go to California, and fight. 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call, and the voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the person said, "Thanks. And you've got to let gay people so that that young child and the thousands upon thousands like that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, there are only gays, but those blacks, and the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the S's, without hope, the S's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you got to give them hope." Thank you very much.
So that is only the smaller version of the speech. I was able to find the longer version, the more popular version. I wasn't going to play that several minutes for you, but I have it here, and I want to read for you a segment from it real quick as soon as I post it for you. Just to look at it at your own time. Just a minute, I'm going to get the next video set up. All right. Pulling that up now. Sorry, just a minute. Tech issues. All right. The segment from the larger speech that I just sent you. And the young gay people in the Altoona, Pennsylvanias, and the Richmond, Minnesotas, who are coming out and hear Anita Bryant on television and her story, the only thing they have to look forward to is hope. And you have to give them hope. Hope for a better world, hope for a better tomorrow, hope for a better place to come if the pressures at home are too great, hope that all will be all right. Without hope, not only gays, but the blacks, the seniors, the handicapped, the us's will give up. And if you help elect to the Central Committee and other offices more gay people that gives a green light to all who feel disenfranchised, a green light to move forward, it means hope to a nation that has given up. Because if a gay person makes it, the doors are open to everyone. Now, Harvey's speeches were just that. They were there to give as many people hope as he possibly could. Now, there was another set of speeches that he gave when it looked like the Briggs Initiative was gaining steam and it was actually going to surpass everything that he was doing. He came up with another set of speeches, of which I will only read you a segment from. And in this set, he was talking about the importance of coming out. Now, Harvey Milk did not start the coming out movement, but he made it big. He made it to the level it is at now. And he had a reasoning for it, but I'm going to let him tell you through his words as I read them. Gay brothers and sisters, you must come out. Come out to your parents. I know that it is hard and will hurt them, but think about how they will hurt you in the voting booth. Come out to your relatives. Come out to your friends, if indeed they are your friends. Come out to your neighbors, to your fellow workers, to the people who work where you eat and shop. Come out only to the people you know and who know you, not to anyone else. But once and for all, break down the myths, destroy the lies and distortions for your sake, for their sake. Harvey's reasoning, and I'll put a link to that quote in a discussion on the coming out speeches that he gave. His reasoning was that at the time, to protect themselves, as I told you at the beginning of the video, you had to protect yourself in that era. If you were homosexual, you just didn't tell anyone. And Harvey's idea became, if you tell them that you're homosexual, if everyone now knows that they know a homosexual in their family, in their workplace, as a friend, in their church, wherever, then they can no longer stand behind the myth. They have to begin facing reality. They have to put that distorted reality of theirs to you as a person. Enough homosexuals, the myths will break themselves. So he began, on the very night that he came up with the idea, he told all of his staffers, who most of them were homosexual, he told them all, if you haven't told your families, now is the time to do it. And he took the phone from the desk and he passed it to each one and forced them to call home and let their parents know. And it was a bold move. These men and women could have lost everything, and I'm sure some of them did. But then Harvey took his message to the Castro, to San Francisco as a whole, to California, and then to the nation. He wanted every homosexual, from Dade County, Florida, all the way to San Francisco, to come out, to let people know to make sure that the closet door could no longer be shut. And when the votes started coming in on November 7th, 1978, it looked like Harvey Milk's initiative was going to fail. The votes were coming in, and they were overwhelmingly in support of Anita Bryant and John Briggs's California Proposition 6. But as the last voting booths began to close and the last votes began coming in, there was a huge sweep in the other direction. And Anita Bryant made her first major defeat in San Francisco, which is the transformation of San Francisco into what it is today. At that moment, it was almost like you could hear a pin drop. Ronald Reagan, seeing the writing on the wall, had reversed his own position on homosexuality, at least publicly. And all of a sudden, the victories that Anita Bryant had won, starting in San Francisco, they started working backwards. And they started failing everywhere that she'd been. It was a complete turnaround. And Harvey Milk was the man who did it. So Harvey Milk had opposition, political opposition. One of them was one of the members who served on the city supervisor committee with him, a man named Dan White. And Dan White was a former San Francisco police officer. And if you remember from earlier in our conversation, San Francisco police routinely dragged homosexuals out into the street and beat them and arrested them. So Dan White was a part of that. Dan White, after failing to get Proposition 6 in, along with some of his other initiatives, he resigned. And upon resigning, he was contacted by the police bureau, and they pushed him to ask Mayor Moscone of San Francisco at the time to reinstate him, even though he just turned in his resignation. Mayor Moscone, though, knew that San Francisco was no longer the conservative San Francisco of Dan White that it used to be. So he denied Dan White's request. Then on November 27th, just 20 days after Harvey Milk had saved the nation by stopping Anita Bryant, Dan White broke into San Francisco City Hall in the wee hours of the morning through a basement window to avoid the metal detectors. He walked into Mayor Moscone's office to beg for his position back. When Mayor Moscone refused, Dan White produced a pistol from his jacket pocket and shot Mayor Moscone dead. And then he repocketed the pistol and went into Harvey Milk's office and shot him dead. Dan White was arrested, but everyone in the courtroom, including the person who was supposed to be seeing him behind bars, knew, and I mean the attorney who was supposed to be prosecuting him, they were all Dan White's friends. So Dan White was given 5 years in prison for shooting 2 politicians, one of them the mayor, in cold blood, and was released after 2. And the reason why he was given such a reduced sentence was because his defense attorney had successfully argued that Dan White had had too many Twinkies for breakfast that morning, so he was in a sugar rush. And that it was a sugar rush that led to a bad mental state that led to Dan White shooting 2 people in cold blood in a premeditated murder. After the ruling came out on May 21st, 1979, the San Francisco PD began to celebrate over the police radios. They began singing songs such as Danny Boy. Dan White was Irish. And this was found out by the citizens of San Francisco, who, before that, shortly after Harvey's assassination, around 10,000 of them had led a peaceful candlelight demonstration through the streets of the Castro in San Francisco. However, with the police celebrating what had just happened with Dan White, and with the clear evidence that it was set up to be that way, even right down to the judge and the lawyers, the riots began again. These riots would be called the White Night Riots. Cleve Jones, who had been recruited by Harvey Milk, at the time he was a homeless boy, homosexual, and Harvey took him in, and Cleve became a major voice who could bring in many, many people. And so on May 21st, 1979, after that ruling had come out and the police began celebrating quite openly, Cleve Jones got a crowd together. He started going into all the gay bars, telling them to come out and be heard. It was time. It was time for homosexuals to be heard, to let injustice finally cease. And he gathered around 5,000 people initially, and they started attacking police cars. They started setting the cars on fire in a march to City Hall. And when they got to City Hall, they started setting trash cans on fire and throwing them through the windows. A reporter who had followed the mob was able to talk to a few of the rioters, who the bulk of them were homosexual. And the reporter says, "Why are you doing this? This was Harvey's City Hall." And probably with a smile on their face, the reply was, "We had too many Twinkies this morning." So police officers retaliated, not just by arresting, that would have been legitimate. They took tape and they covered their badges. And then they began mercilessly attacking protesters, beating them to a pulp within the streets. Both the rioters and the peaceful demonstrators alike. The officers, when they were done with that, actually attacking the people who were out in the streets doing things, police officers entered a gay bar called the Elephant Walk. And despite their orders not to enter gay bars that night, they rushed into the Elephant Walk shouting, "Dirty cocksuckers and sick faggots," end quote. They shattered large plate glass windows of the bar and began dragging patrons out and attacking them, beating them again to a pulp. And this lasted for 15 minutes until the police withdrew from the bar and joined other officers who were indiscriminately attacking gays on the street. This time the riots had begun to die down, and now they were just attacking to attack. The incident in total lasted nearly 2 hours. So Harvey Milk's legacy, though, didn't end in a riot. After Dan White was released from prison early, 2 years after that, he shot himself. His family would have nothing to do with him anymore, nor would San Francisco or California, for that matter. The legacy of Harvey Milk, though, after the police brutality of the White Night riots, the new mayor, Feinstein, put in a gay-friendly head of police, who then started hiring openly gay police officers, which made the SFPD no longer an anti-gay police force. Harvey, as I stated to you before, his coming out movement worked, and Anita Bryant became a footnote in history. Ronald Reagan, as I noted before, even stopped supporting Anita Bryant in her initiatives, probably because he wanted to be elected. So, with that said, a short time later, the AIDS epidemic got huge. Several of the men that Harvey had taught politics to became very influential in the awareness movement for AIDS. For those of you of the Republican Party, especially those of you who knew me when I was on the Republican Central Committee, if you'd ever had a conversation with me about Reagan, you may remember that I was probably the only Republican who didn't like the man. And here's just one of the reasons why. As president, Ronald Reagan was experiencing an AIDS epidemic that was killing literal millions of his citizens, had infected many more. And he put up $0 to find a cure. That's why I said earlier that he stopped supporting Anita Bryant publicly. But when it came to a major health risk, Ronald Reagan didn't do a thing, because again, at the time it was believed it was an only homosexual virus. Only homosexuals could get it. That was the belief. So countless numbers died when they didn't need to, because when AIDS research, the money started coming in, people started living all of a sudden. And if Reagan had put up that money earlier on, at all in his presidency, we wouldn't have seen the major unfortunate series of deaths that happened. But again, this is a video about Harvey Milk, but I want to talk about his legacy, and AIDS is a part of that. Even though he died before then, Cleve Jones, I mentioned him earlier. If you didn't know who Cleve Jones was, you may have heard of the Names Project, otherwise known as the AIDS quilt. The quilt is ever growing, and each part of the quilt is dedicated to another person who died of AIDS. And Cleve Jones is the founder of that project. So in a way, Harvey, sorry, I'm tearing up a little bit. Harvey lives on through people like Cleve Jones, who again was a homeless kid when Harvey met him. And he completely turned Cleve's life around, and countless others. He truly, just as he said in his speech, gave them hope. The memories of Harvey Milk do not end there. Now Harvey was a major supporter and lover of opera, had been since he was very little. And so it's of no surprise that much later after his death, musicals and operas were written to tell Harvey's story. I have snippets of two of the more famous ones. This one I'll play for you. It's literally Harvey Milk, an opera in 3 acts, written by Stephen Wallace. So I'll play the music for you, and of course I'll post a link about that below. so you can look at it. I'm not going to play this whole thing, but I'll post the link to it down below. All right, so before we start listening to Anita Bryant, just a minute, let me get the next video set up, since we earlier were having a little bit of a problem with that. So that came out in 1995. There was a musical called The Harvey Milk Show that came out in 1997, and that one debuted at the Source Theater. Stephen Kupo. The opera that I mentioned earlier was the music was by Stephen Wallace and premiered at the New York City Opera House. Unfortunately, the Harvey Milk Show didn't last long. People didn't really think it was all that good, so there's an article about that there. And then there was another Harvey Milk related event. I Am Harvey Milk was the name of it. It debuted for one night only. And I Am Harvey Milk came out on October 6th of 2014. The music was by Andrew Lippa and was commissioned by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, along with Atlanta Gay Men's Chorus, Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, Twin Cities Gay Men's Chorus, and Vancouver Men's Chorus, and Heartland Men's Chorus. This one actually did pretty well. I have 3 links that I'll post for you about that, just in case you're interested. 1, 2, and then the third one is a video, which let's hope it. This one, operatic masterpiece. This song is I Am the Bullet. Oops, random ad as it did. Go away.
This is to be played only in the event of my death by assassination. I have considered myself a candidate.
This is Harvey Milk's actual voice.
Myself part of a movement, part of a candidacy. I consider the movement the candidate. There are things that I wish I had time to explain. Everything I did, almost everything was done with the eyes of the movement.
So that was an actual recording. He made 3 different tapes of his last will and testament in case he should die by assassination. So Harvey knew that the things that he was doing would probably lead to his death. I'll let you listen to the song a little bit. Oh, the link, sorry. So that's just a little excerpt of it. So the musical legacy doesn't end there, though. This year, a new musical, A Letter to Harvey Milk, premiered off-Broadway, and I have a little article about that. Unfortunately, there's no videos on YouTube I can play for you from a musical that is that new. So, wrapping up my lecture part of this, I'm going to try to make this broad. Harvey Milk's legacy lives on in the pride movements that happen across the nation. They live on every time a homosexual comes out of the closet, remember that was Harvey's big push. Every time a church stands up to its authority figures and says, we will not discriminate anymore. When the Supreme Court passed that beloved legislation that finally allowed the right to marry, that's Harvey Milk. Harvey is seen in any homosexual activist who stays true to the movement and its goal. Harvey Milk, I want to believe his spirit was with every single life, homosexual or not, that lived through the AIDS virus and or died by it. He's with the people who still run the Names Project with Cleve Jones. He's with Matthew Shepard, who was brutally murdered several years ago for no other reason than the fact that he was gay, stripped naked and sodomized with tools, and then wrapped in barbed wire. Harvey Milk, sorry, very emotional. Harvey Milk is with the people of the Pulse nightclub. And he's with all those who are going to stand against what's going on in this country now when it comes to people like the Kentucky clerk, whose name is not even worthy of being mentioned, who, despite her role as a state employee, continues to deny, per my understanding, marriage certificates to homosexual couples. Harvey is with everyone who is going to stand up for justice for homosexuals, not just in this country, but in Saudi Arabia, where they can still be killed, in Iran, in St. Petersburg and Moscow and Russia, the largest country by landmass on the planet, where you can be arrested simply for holding hands with your gay partner. So, that's Harvey Milk. That is just a small snippet of what he did, but it's, in my opinion, the most important. That's the end of the lecture part of this. I want to leave it open for a few minutes for anyone who has any questions, comments. Again, I said at the beginning of this video that I wanted to do it live so that I could bring people into this, so it wouldn't just be me talking. So it could be a group-oriented learning experience. So I'll give it a few minutes, even if it's just me being silent. I'll just ramble with some thoughts and context and everything about why I made this video until I start seeing comments. Context, no, I am not homosexual, but my parents are. I experienced many a bit of discrimination from my mom being fired because she was a lesbian in the Illinois public school system. I'm going to leave names out to protect people, even if they are the ones who perpetuated injustice. And even here in Maryland, then I'd like to say. All right, first question came in. Cornelius Fletcher asks, what is the best way to remember Harvey? It's a subjective question. I think the first thing that anyone can do to remember Harvey is to research Harvey. There's more than enough material out there to last several hours of conversation. Many of his speeches in full and in short can be found on YouTube. I wasn't going to lambaste you with every minute of his speeches, but they are worth listening to. There's a really good one from the coming out speech. Again, I only read a small excerpt from it, but there's a small excerpt of him giving that speech. So learn about him, because public education in college isn't going to do it. I am in my 4th university, and in none of them have I ever heard Harvey Milk being taught in any of the activist circles, or any of the American history circles. And he did too much to be so unilaterally forgotten. So educate yourself about him. The second thing I would do, or say to do, to remember Harvey is, if you are homosexual, come out. Because that's what beat Anita Bryant and John Briggs and anti-homosexuals the country over. It was very important then, it's very important now, if you're doing it for the right reasons, and it takes courage. So that's step 3, have courage. If you want to remember Harvey, get out there. It took Harvey the first 45 years of his life to become politically involved, because he didn't think there was anything a gay man could do. We know that's not true anymore. We live in a much more accepting society. But, you know, you listen to our president of the United States, especially the vice president, who I think is scarier for the homosexual movement than Donald Trump is. And even local politicians, local churches even. There's so much going on in church leadership. If you're a member of a church, if it is a anti-gay church and you are pro-gay, you remember Harvey by pushing change in the church. Church, just like any other institution, political or otherwise, will not change unless there are voices in it to get it to change. All right? We are change. If you want to remember Harvey, be the change. Again, that's what Harvey stood for. So I know that was a long answer, and that's just my opinion, but I tried to base it on what Harvey himself taught. So thank you, Cornelius, for that. Thank you, Chris, for all the nice comments that you've left. If there's more questions, I'll give it a couple more minutes. If there's nothing else, and I'll go ahead and finish the video. I will be putting this on my YouTube channel. I recently taught myself how to do such things. Well, I'm not seeing any other comments, so I will go ahead and conclude the video. This is episode 2 of The Truth Hurts. This was also dubbing as part of my project for my music and social justice class, which is why there was a lot of focus on music. Thank you all for coming in and being a part of this learning experience. I love teaching, even when I have a cold that makes my voice sound terrible. All right, guys, have a lovely night, and please remember that this video, after I hit the finish button, you can share it on your pages. It'll be about an hour long, but hey, if you think there's something here worth teaching, it's probably worth you sharing. So, see you guys.